The early 90s was the heyday of brawny action. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the world's biggest star thanks to Total Recall and Terminator 2.
That's good. Maybe you could practice in front of a mirror or something.
And Sylvester Stallone wasn't far behind him with Cliffhanger and Demolition Man.
Thanks a lot, you shit.
For repeated violations of the verbal morality statute.
So much for the seashells.
But the lower-tier action stars were starting to catch up. Steven Seagal had a string of hits and was briefly about to hit the big time with Under Siege.
I'd watch it right back. We still have a week together.
I guess that means I won't get to see you go through puberty.
At the same time, the muscles from Brussels himself, Jean-Claude Van Damme, was finding his way into bigger studio fare, and teamed up with arguably the greatest action director of all time for one of his best movies, Hard Target. Jump back to the year 1991. This was when Jean-Claude Van Damme had two movies that broke through in the North American box office. First up in January of that year was Lionheart, which carried a low budget but made $22 million for Universal. Something interesting was going on with the grosses for all of JCVD's movies. Every time a new one came out, it made a little bit more than the one before it. In the summer of 1991, Double Impact was a major hit, making close to $30 million. Not bad for a lower budget B movie. It was big enough that in the summer of 1992, Jean-Claude Van Damme got to lead his first big-budget action movie, Universal Soldier, which grossed $36 million domestically, not bad at all, but was a smash hit overseas, with the film coming close to $100 million worldwide. Audiences clearly had a thing for the muscles from Brussels, but what made him different from a guy like Steven Seagal is that women liked him just as much as men. He was such a heartthrob that Columbia put him in a straightforward melodrama called Nowhere to Run that only had a modest amount of action, but it made okay money. Van Damme could seemingly do a lot of things well. He could kick ass for the fellas and then show ass for the ladies. Universal definitely noticed and signed him to a rich deal that would lead to a string of modest hits throughout the decade.
I thought you was gonna catch a ship.
Maybe I'll stick around to run for mayor.
His first film for them would be Hard Target. A take on The Most Dangerous Game, JCVD would star as Chance Boudreaux, a Cajun, nearly homeless, out-of-work seaman who's hired by a young woman, Yancy Butler's Natasha, to find her missing homeless father. It turns out the man was hunted and killed for sport by Lance Henriksen's Emile Fouchon and Arnold Vosloo's Hick Van Cleef, who arranged manhunts in New Orleans for their wealthy clients.
This is New Orleans, Mr. Zanan, not Beirut.
Soon, Chance and Natasha become targets when they learn the truth, but as the title suggests, Chance isn't going to be such an easy guy to hunt.
Boudreaux is the target we're after. You are a buffalo. Move!
Hard Target was written by Chuck Farrer, a former U.S. Navy SEAL turned writer of action movies, having penned, of course, Navy SEALs and Darkman. He also plays Natasha's father in the violent opening. What would make the film an event for action fans was that it would mark the U.S. debut of John Woo. Widely regarded as the greatest action director in the world, Woo had made a string of action masterpieces in Hong Kong with A Better Tomorrow, The Killer, Bullet in the Head, and Hard Boiled, all earning him fans in the U.S., including JCVD and the head of Universal. Woo was hired to direct the movie, and he made it into his calling card, building up the action to a truly spectacular level unlike anything really seen in American movies up to that point. And all for an amazingly thrifty $20 million budget. This movie pushed to shame other action films that cost 3 times that in 1993.
Next time, be more careful when you show your wallet.
Watching the movie now, it's clear that John Woo knows exactly how to use his cast. I think Woo realized JCVD's range at the time was kind of limited, so the plot is actually built around the villain, Lance Henriksen's Fouchon, whose role is even more prominent in the work print.
I understand why we insist on payment up front.
A sportsman obsessed with hunting the deadliest prey, Henriksen looks like a character from a classic John Woo movie. This likely frustrated Van Damme, who apparently did his own cut of the film that excised most of Henriksen's role. It never got released, as Woo was somewhat protected by the fact that his producer Jim Dax and exec producer Sam Raimi were big fans of his.
It's a picture called Hard Target, and it was to star Jean-Claude Van Damme. So we felt it would be the perfect combination for John Woo's first American picture to get him in on this because we needed someone who had a great visual style and a great sense of action.
The film was extensively cut, but not due to creative interference. Rather, it was due to the MPAA, who were stunned at the level of violence in the film, which wouldn't have actually made anyone bat an eye in Hong Kong. Wu himself said that he would have preferred someone like Kurt Russell as his lead, but years later, in a THR article, he said he had no regrets about working with Van Damme, and that despite everything, actually quite admired him.
If you understand me, just grunt. Again.
Back to JCVD. While he had some issues with Wu at the time, although he spoke very positively of him since, the director used him exceptionally well. He films Jean-Claude Van Damme lovingly, with his greasy mullet looking great and giving him plenty of opportunities to combine his martial arts acumen with classic John Woo gunplay. There are some incredible action set pieces here, including the famous scene where Chance stands on a motorcycle shooting at the bad guys and polishes it all off with a flip. The action throughout the film is impeccable, especially if you watch the unrated cut that was released on Blu-ray last year. The carnage is exquisite.
It appears we'll have one last hunt after all, Pick.
The movie also boasts an incredible supporting cast, probably the best Jean-Claude Van Damme ever had. As the love interest Natasha, we have Yancy Butler, who was a 90s dream girl thanks to her role on the syndicated series Witchblade, as well as the Wesley Snipes movie Drop Zone. She has good chemistry with Van Damme and a wonderfully expressive face, especially during the now infamous snake scene.
Is it dead?
Not hardly.
Lance Henriksen, of course, is brilliant as Fouchon. This was a golden era for the actor, with him also stealing the show in another 90s favorite, Stone Cold. Eventually, he would get to be the hero of his own series, Chris Carter's Millennium. And just recently, he was brilliant in Viggo Mortensen's Falling. Hard Target also offered South African heavy Arnold Vosloo a great early part as Van Cleef, who was no doubt named after the spaghetti western icon Lee Van Cleef. Based on his performance here, Vosloo would be cast as Darkman in the slew of DTV sequels before going on to his most famous role in The Mummy. Best of all, though, is the late Wilford Brimley of Cocoon. Whoever's idea it was to cast the diabetes-afflicted Quaker Oats pitchman as Chance's Cajun Uncle Duvet was a genius.
So tell me, this man's what chase after you. He mad at you for business or pleasure?
Both.
Uh-huh.
Wu said the idea was to have him come in and lighten up the movie, and Brimley looks like he's having the time of his life here, riding horses and killing bad guys with his bow and arrow while chewing scenery. It's reminiscent in some ways of when, at the end of Nobody, Christopher Lloyd shows up as Bob Odenkirk's dad and starts mowing down bad guys. You can tell Brimley never thought he'd get the chance to do a big action movie on the big screen, and the smile he has on his face during some of his action moments says it all.
Can you get up?
I cannot dance, but I can get up.
Hard Target wound up being a decent-sized hit for Universal. It made about $32 million in the US, which is pretty notable because it came out in the summer of '93, which had a ton of competition, and this was about average for Jean-Claude Van Damme. But the gross was more than doubled overseas, and it became a huge hit on the rental market once it hit VHS. Obviously, Universal was happy with the results, and they would keep making movies with Van Damme over the next few years, with them putting out probably his biggest hit, Time Cop, the following year. Meanwhile, John Woo would have to direct another straightforward US action flick, Broken Arrow, before getting the chance to really do a true Hong Kong-style action movie with Face Off, which would establish him as an A-list director in Hollywood, for a while anyway, before he would eventually return to China for his magnum opus, Red Cliff.
You lucky son of a bitch! You want some more of that? Yeah!
While JCVD's career cooled after the 90s, Hard Target remains a beloved entry into his canon, and who knows, JCVD is still in good shape and could easily handle whatever John Woo could throw at him nowadays. Maybe the two will even reunite someday. They did eventually make a Hard Target 2, but it was a DTV, in-name only sequel starring Scott Adkins. Maybe one day they'll make the real thing.
I think I hurt pretty bad. Now this real catastrophe. Just real bad.
Yeah, real bad.